with the main focus in the Netherlands on business development and innovation, and is also helping the UTP project from his expertise. Besides that, he is also helping a lot of CEOs of companies to present their story in a very good way in order to engage other parties in co-creation, which we have talked about a little bit this morning and we'll talk about also in the afternoon. Job, thank you for being here. The other guest I would like to invite is Floris Clemens. Floris Clemens is the former head of strategy of ABN AMRO. ABN AMRO used to be very honest, a very big global player, 100,000 people working, had a bit of a problem during the crisis, was taken over by the government, and actually ABN AMRO is a perfect example of, based on that failure, how we can reinvent ourselves to become this global player again. And we're going to elaborate on this as well. Thank you for being here, Floris. Floris is the architect behind UTP and now board member of the FOCAFET Foundation. And FOCAFET stands for Open, Convenient and Fair Economic Transactions. So it's all about also sustainability and the better projects for the better world. I would also like to invite Justus Brouwer. Thank you. Justus Brouwer is Global Responsible Business Development for HP. And actually the two gentlemen sitting over there next to each other is also a perfect example on how innovation works and will work. Because what we have less heard this morning, it was engaging customers in the co-creation process for new products and services. But the other interesting part, am I doing that? The other interesting part is combining energies, for example, with big IT firms when you're talking about banking. Financial industry is all about IT, which we'll hear later also from the perspective of the Danske Bank. How fast are you in developments as a bank on the IT side to give the nice apps to your customers in order to do their financial transactions? So we also strongly believe that there is no such thing anymore as a supplier and a buyer, just an IT firm and a bank. We believe that it's the co-creation effort of an IT company and a financial company that will make the difference. The other chair will not be filled today. We do it a little bit different, and that's also innovation. You do not expect always, you do not always get what you expect. It's a learning journey. What we would like to start with is with the empty seat. And this will be virtually filled by Professor Dr. Paul Iske. And Paul Iske is also working in the northern of Europe a lot, also with Scandinavian countries, on innovation. And he's saying innovation is actually a very simple thing. Innovation is something like combining the uncombinable into new thinking. It's the this and the that, and in another way, combined, that makes the difference. So what we will start with, and I will ask the gentleman behind the desk now, to start with a short introduction film of Paul Iske explaining his thoughts on what co-creation and innovation, and especially combinatoric innovation, is all about. Gentlemen, can we start a film?
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a great honor for me to be able to introduce my presentation for you. Unfortunately, I'm not in Seoul at the moment. I will arrive tomorrow, but I hope that in this way I can also share my ideas and my experiences with you. I would like to give a presentation about what I call combinatoric innovation. And in particular, I will talk about the conditions that are necessary to enable this type of innovation. I will talk about environments that support combinatoric innovation. As you know, we are experiencing a very special period. In fact, we are dealing with what we call a perfect storm. where a lot of changes are happening simultaneously. In economy, in technology and in society. And this is indeed a very complex situation. And as Mencken already said, for every complex problem there is a solution that is simple, elegant and wrong. And we have to find the right solutions to the right equations. And the equations are those who tell us what kind of conditions we need to fulfill in order to have the kind of innovation that I'm going to talk about. Open innovation, combinatoric innovation. And we know that what we have done in the past is not good enough anymore to achieve our goals in the future. It's like what this book is saying, what got you here won't get you there. We really have to innovate. We have to change. And as an example, I would like to discuss a very important trend that we see nowadays. And that is the trend of shrinking transaction costs. It means that it is now cheaper and more easier than ever to get access to information, to get access to products and services, to new customers, even to capital. And as a result, you see a lot of new business models. Business models where people are able to share their knowledge, to share information, to come up with new platforms that fulfill the services that traditionally were fulfilled by companies like banks. And you see it here in phase one, we had the Yahoo and the Netscape of this world, the browsers. Then we got new services like Google, the first payment systems like PayPal, we have eBay, we have Skype that completely upset the telecom industries, and now we are dealing with the so-called sharing economy with a lot of new concepts like Kickstarter want to support the development of a new product. But it can also be that you want to support a social project and that you give a little money, and if enough people are doing this, together you can achieve something very important. Other platforms are not just about giving money, donating money, but for instance about lending money. And K.E.Y is a very good example of that, where a lot of people can make a small contribution, they lend a small amount of money, and with that money other people can do very useful things. They can be a social entrepreneur. These platforms again benefit from the fact that it becomes more and more easy to broadcast what you want to achieve and reach out to a lot of people on the one hand. On the other hand, a lot of people can make small contributions and so make things possible. Another innovation, which in fact is based on a very traditional product, is the social impact bond, where people can contribute to a development that has a certain risk, and for instance you do something with a good value for society. Let's say you want to solve an unemployment issue. Now, it is very difficult for governments to continuously support this type of developments, and it is because they cannot always take the risk, or they can only spend the money if the outcome really already has achieved. Now then so-called social investors come in. They can say well, we take the risk, we pay upfront the money that is necessary to make the development happening, and if there is success, we will be repaid by the group that is having the benefits, or most of the times by the government. It's a new distribution of benefit and risks, and by making this possible, creating these new combinations, projects can move on that otherwise would have been stopped. This all means that banks have to reconsider their position. This is a book, it's called Zombie Banks. And you know, a zombie is somebody who is dead but doesn't know it yet. It means that organizations and also some banks are still using a business model that has expired. It means that maybe you still make money, but it is pretty sure that in the future, the long-term future, you will not make your money in this way. You really have to reinvent yourself. Otherwise, other people will take your business. And that's why we need innovation. And innovation is the process of value creation by applying knowledge in a way that didn't happen before. It is a new combination. It doesn't mean always that the knowledge has to be new. It is a new way of applying it. And very important, it's not just new, it is something new that creates value. And it is the value that I just described, which can be financial, intellectual or societal value. And for that we need to develop the right environment. And what is an environment? For me, an environment consists out of 4 spaces. The first space is process organization. What kind of agreements have we made? What kind of incentives? How are we organized? This is very important for people, how they act and react, how they behave. The second space is the social, the cultural space. It depends very much on the type of people, how we behave. Who is there? How are they dealing with each other? How are they dealing with the planet? How do they treat me? How do they treat themselves? Very important for me to see how I respond to certain challenges and certain questions. Thirdly, of course, we're doing more and more in the virtual, the digital space. We work together, we exchange information, we communicate on the internet, with mobile applications, in systems. And so more and more our behavior, our way of working is being determined by the virtual, the digital space. However, we still are dealing with people, with human beings, and human beings are somewhere. They are in the physical, the real space. And quite often the influence of the physical real space is underestimated. That's why I make it a little bit bigger here. It's very important that when you look at what people want to do, the processes that you want to support, that you offer the appropriate physical environment. Some people believe that innovation is all about technology. And of course, technology is making a huge contribution to our way of living and to innovation in general. Nevertheless, I think this formula is true. It says new technology in an old organization gives you an expensive old organization, which means that you really have to address also the other components of the environment, in particular also the social environment, but also the space that I described as process and organization. So technology is important, but technology without the so-called social innovation will not give the right results. As an example, we also need creative people. We need creative organizations. What is creativity? For me, creativity is the skill to look at problems, at opportunities, at situations from different perspectives. We call this multi-paradigmatic thinking. It means that you can see the world from different perspectives. And the word that is connected to this is PO. PO means provocative operation. It means that you every now and then you have to think about a situation as it actually cannot exist. A situation that is impossible. A situation that might not even be allowed. But in that new situation you see new perspectives, you see new opportunities. You see new ideas, and these ideas might also be useful in the situation as you have to deal with. A lot of people ask me, if creativity is so important, can you manage it? Can you measure it? And the answer is yes. And here you see a very interesting picture. In fact, if you believe that creativity has to do with the number of patterns you can have in your brain, then the question is, how can I increase the number of patterns in my head? How can I increase the number of thoughts, perspectives in my head? And there are 2 very basic human processes connected to this. And the first one is asking questions. If you ask questions, you get more insights, new patterns, new thinking, and that is very important for your creativity. The other process has to do with what we call lateral thinking. It means that you use something that has been developed here and you use it somewhere else. Ideas, experiences developed here, using somewhere else. Like we can learn from nature, we call that biomimicry. That's a great example of lateral thinking. We talk about new combinations. And actually a process where new combinations are being made is humor. Every time you laugh at the clue, in fact what you're doing you are connecting things that were not connected before. Maybe they are even impossible to connect or illogical to connect. And at the moment it happens, it's funny, you start laughing. Now take these two basic human processes. The number of times you ask a question during a day and you multiply it with the number of times you laugh during a day. The product is called the Creativity Index or the Creativity Score. And it means that if you laugh a lot, if you ask a lot of questions, this Creativity Index is high. Here you see a picture that shows the result of research by NASA. NASA is very interested in creativity because when something goes wrong in a huge or complex project of NASA, quite often it can only be solved by creative thinking, by improvising, because all the other things are being dealt with systems and processes and protocols. So if something goes wrong, it is probably unique, and then you need this improvising thinking, creativity. So NASA is interested, and what they did is they measured this creativity index, questions times laughing, and they studied how this thing develops as a function of age. And in this picture you see the result. And actually what it says is if you put this thing equal to 1, but actually to 98 for 4-year-old children, it goes all the way down to 0.02 for 44-year-old people. So it has reduced dramatically. And when you're 44 and the creativity index is only 0.02, you talk about the state of terminal seriousness. You have become terminal serious. Actually, what I would like to discuss with you, how do you make it happen that this creativity index does not reduce to such a small number? How can we help people to remain creative, to ask questions, to make new connections? What kind of environments are we talking about? Well, we talk about thinking organizations. The brain consists of many neurons, but very important is that these neurons are connected to each other. They form a network. So connections between the different parts of your brain at the end of the day make the brain as powerful as it is. And I believe that the same applies to organizations. So you have to connect people within organizations. And the good news is knowledge is everywhere. So there is a lot of things to be connected. And that is exactly the driving force behind the transition from what we call closed innovation, where people use their own knowledge and bring this knowledge to the market, into a new situation where we talk about open innovation, where you not only use your own knowledge, but you also are looking for knowledge elsewhere with other people, other organizations, and you connect to it. And then you decide the new product that is the consequence of this combination. Who is bringing this to the market? Am I doing it? Is he doing it? Are we doing it together? But that means that you need new skills. You need new capabilities. You have to skill to find knowledge that is supporting your knowledge. You have to be able to share the profits, to share the market. These are new skills in a new era. These are next generation organizations. And I take it one step further. I think when people start to know each other, work together, they start appreciating each other's knowledge and they start discovering ways to combine their skills, to combine their knowledge and find new ways of value creation. That's what I call combinatoric innovation. And in fact, it can be a process of surprise. Actually, it is a creative process between different organizations and between different people. And sometimes you simply don't know what you will find. And that is what we call serendipity. Serendipity is the skill to find something very important by coincidence. And certain people, certain organizations are good in it because they're open for it. A Dutch eye surgeon once said, serendipity is looking for a needle in a haystack and then finding the beautiful daughter of the farmer. The fundamental question here is, what could we do together? Will it blend? If we put our skills and our knowledge together, what will come out? But it is extremely important for open innovation and for combinatoric innovation to get to know each other, because otherwise you don't know who knows what and how you could connect. We have built such an environment where people can come together, where people can start to get to know to each other's knowledge, where they are entering a dialogue, where they can enter the question, hey, what could we do together? And this environment is called the Dialogues House. It's a combination of all four spaces that I just mentioned. It's about an organized environment where we organize events, where we have a department working on innovation. It's about culture. We wholeheartedly invite people who are open for themes like creativity, innovation, collaboration, sustainability. So it's a kind of clubhouse for this type of people. It's a social space. Of course, we also work with digital and virtual products. You're now in a session about the UETP, the Uniform Economic Transaction Protocol, which is mostly or even purely internet-based. It's digital-based, and we offer a physical environment. The Dialogues House is really a house. It is a facility. It's built in the former dealing room of AML. It's 2,000 square meters, and the fact that people can come physically together gives a great contribution to this process of combinatoric innovation. And in this Dialogues House, in our club home, we have brought people together thinking about the next generation bank. We produced a manifesto which has been offered to our chairman, and it really highlights all the important issues that we think that the bank of the future has to deal with, and the conditions that need to be fulfilled to sustain and to support open and combinatoric innovation. And we know if we're looking for the future, we don't know what it will bring to us. And if we innovate, we don't know exactly what will be the outcome. It's like Einstein said, if we knew what we are doing, we wouldn't call it research. And the same is true for innovation. Again, serendipity, the skill to find something important by coincidence, is the key here. It means that you have to try and experiment. That is the key skill that you need to do. And not so much work with all these business cases. I think this is a very appropriate definition of a business case. It says it is a set of lies that make management decide what we want them to decide. Because if you are involved in innovation, you don't know what's going to happen. Of course, you try to gather as much as information as possible. But if it's about innovation, you also know that there are uncertainties, and acknowledge that. And maybe sometimes you are having a mix of facts, assumptions and hope. And that's fine, because the hope has to be there, because you want to create new value. But it is new, so you have to see what happens. And you have to accept in that situation that you can fail. You can have success, but you can also fail. If you do everything right, if you work hard, it still can be a failure because of the complexity of your product or the complexity of the world surrounding you. So accept that fail is an abbreviation. It means first attempt in learning. Sometimes you earn, sometimes you learn. So we have developed the concept of brilliant failures, where people try to do something that makes sense, that could be valuable. They work hard, they don't make stupid mistakes, but still the outcome is different than expected. But you can learn from it, and it can inspire other people to move on, and it can inspire yourself. That's why we have set up
That's why he has set up the Institute for Brilliant Failures. But this failure, is that allowed? In many organizations, failure is not allowed because it said, okay, you get a stamp on your head, you failed. But as we learned this morning also from the perfect story of GE, you have to fail in order to succeed and grow to new innovations and maybe also develop new standards. And I want to introduce the next speaker, that is Job de Bos, as I introduced before, and he will talk about what new innovation in standards can deliver for economic growth. Job, can you, I hand you over the green button for the slide.
Yes, the green button and then...
and the red one is go back.
Okay, well, thank you.
Please, Job.
Thanks. So, great to be here. Imagine being a sailor 200 years ago. without a computer, GPS, or other tools to tell you where you are or where you are going. How do you know your place in the world? 200 years ago, one would look at the stars and find his place in the world. Would look at the stars and would see which direction we are going. One would throw a rope with a weight tied to it in the water and feel the knots tied into the rope pass through the sailor's hand. Imagine being that sailor. Imagine using that information to find your place in the world. The tools and measures we're using make sense to us, since we're then a sailor 200 years ago. And we use these tools to find our place in the world. But we're dreamers, we have dreams, and we want a great ship. We want a new ship that's faster, that's agile. So we go to the best carpenter we can find here in Sil, right? And we walk into the store, we walk into the shop, and we find a totally different world. Because the carpenter doesn't look at the skies to know where he is or what he's doing. He uses the thumb 200 years ago to measure how big a cupboard needs to be. And uses feet and length and arm for his measures as tool sets. And while we're thinking we want to have this ship built, what we eventually get is this. This is a typical form of miscommunication, what we get when doing transactions in the business world. We talk with one company, another company, and we sometimes speak about a different language. And that's what I'm going to talk about. I have 3 small stories. One is about the emergence of common language. The other one is the value of that language for your business, for your industry, and for the world, in a sense. And the other one is an interesting thought experiment for you. Because I have you in high regard, and I think it's interesting to look at how a transaction could benefit with having a common language. And I will end with just a question for you as an audience. But first, let's go back to 200 years ago, to that question of the sailor and the carpenter who couldn't understand each other and got not what they wanted. To truly understand where common language comes from and how language arises, we need to go to France, also 150 years ago. Precisely in 1799 was when a group of researchers there did research on land. We're going to France, so we're going there for the wine, but specifically for the land the wine was growing on. How do you measure that land? Well, the French at that time used the arpin, which was just a measure. This was called the arpin. Could have used another name. The interesting thing is that they went looking in a small region and they found 9 different standards. 9 different standards of measuring land. That's strange. And what's even stranger is that in the Calvados region, a region which is 10 times smaller than that region, and that region was even 10 times smaller than Korea, they found even 16 standards. How could you work in an environment like that, with 16 different ways of measuring and talking to each other in that sense? Well, the interesting thing is this, that if we look at the measure itself, the arpin was based on two things. First, the amount of land one man could work on a day. On one day, just one day, the amount of land one could work on. second one was the fertility of the soil. Was it good soil to make your wine? And that two combined, those two factors combined created the amount of wine or grain a piece of land could create. Hey, and now we have something. Because again, this measure makes sense. For a farmer in that time, he didn't want to know how many acres of land he had. He wanted to know how many wine or grain a piece of land could produce. So if you were in a steep mountain area, the measure would be different because the amount the land would produce, the amount of grain the land would produce, would also be different. So it's, in fact, the lesson is that the measures we used to use were very contextual, were very based on our local cultures and the local use we use it. Another really good example is, maybe for later on this day, is that in Great Britain we still use the gills for measuring whiskey, or a glass of whiskey. We use a pint for measuring a glass of beer, and we use a gallon to measure our gasoline. Those are all measures, very unpractical in fact, but it's all measures based on culture and a certain background we have. And this is just interesting because so years later, the Industrial Revolution started, and the invention of the railway started, and that made it possible to do business in different regions in the world. And that part made sure that because we suddenly did business in different regions, the old measures didn't work. Because for instance, in France, if you went to, people couldn't understand each other. So that was a huge hassle. And that problem lasted very long, especially at least 400 years ago. And it was only solved in the 1960s when a bureaucratic group of people came together for the 11th time. Each time they came together, and it was 4 years between each meeting, so you can imagine how long it would have taken. And they invented something called the metric system. We now all use and know as things as the second, which we all use and know, the meter, which we use, the kilogram. And it seems so obvious, it seems so simple. But here is the interesting thing. It is in fact a very abstract concept. A concept based on for instance, the meter. What is a meter? It's not a golden pole somewhere in France lying in a vault that exemplifies the meter. The meter is based on a particle, a small atom, that gives radiation, and it has certain wavelengths, and they've just said, okay, this amount of wavelengths, that's the meter. And that's sort of beautiful, because instead of working towards things contextually or culturally, we used something based on nature, something that affects all of us, evenly. It's not the amount of land we work, which can be totally different in every region. So this is in fact the basis of what we work with. Another type of standard, another type of world we're living in, is of course money. Money is also a strange thing. Yeah? We have the dollar, the euro, won. And there's an interesting saying by a monetary philosophist who once said, no human has ever seen a dollar. Interesting. We've seen dollar bills, yes. But dollar itself is an abstract concept. Money itself is a measurement. But a measurement of what? Okay, I'll come back to that later. First of all, let's first have the notion and understand that the existence suddenly of a uniform language to talk to each other lowers transaction costs. It makes it easier to do business. It makes it, we make less mistakes in that sense. So that's a very valuable part. And it's important to notice that value of language increases as complexity increases. For instance, when we do business with other companies, complexity increases when we do business across industries, complexity increases. And when we do businesses around the globe, complexity increases even more. So we need a common language to solve that.
Thank you, Joe. You were also saying that you were want to ask the question to the audience. Are you already there yet?
No, we're almost there.
All right, thank you.
So let's take this for example. This is my phone. This is my phone. It's a good brand, and I like it very much. And the thing is, this phone has more than 140 components in it. To build this phone, you need a lot of suppliers, also a global supply chain network, and a huge amount of transactions. And for this to take place, of course, all these parties need to work in sync, need to work together. So then again, that makes it very clear why we need systems and processes to help us and to make that easier. But this is a large company who can do that. Can you, as an SME also, as a small company, also build such type of infrastructure for your company? It is also interesting to note that the phone itself, is also could grow. The business itself could also grow based on a uniform language. There was one day, for instance, in the European Union once said to all the industry players, okay, come here at the table, and we ask you to just come with one standard. And then we will support it. But if you say, okay, so they chose the GSM standard, and the European Union fully backed that one, and that created a huge growth for that industry. And it's important to notice so that the emergence of a common language in that sense can bring rapid acceleration to the industry it touches. Another good example, for instance, is the HTTP protocol, which is also a common language we use now to talk on the internet. The emergence of that created even more value because it reaches more and more industries. And the more industries the common language touches, the more value it will create for these different industries, but for society as a whole. And in my view, the financial infrastructure is well in that area because it surpasses so many industries and it reaches so many people at a different level. So now we got back to the question to you. So again, what is money? Is it a measure for economic value? If it's a measure, is it a measure for economic value? In that sense, time is also money. So, you know, we also use sometimes all of the concepts of value. So maybe that's not the perfect proxy, for instance, for money. Maybe a better proxy for it, just like we used it for the ARPA, is to look at transactions. So let's take an example, for instance, how the world could look. So I invite you to my home place, the Netherlands, the country of Guzinik. And and you come there and you see this beautiful ship, and because you've done well in the financial industries, you can buy that ship. You want to buy that ship. So you go to the broker, and the broker, and you discuss a price. You get to an agreement. So now we're going to make a transaction. So we get to the agreement, we want to make a transaction. The broker, the ship broker, asks you, okay, how do you want to pay? Well, we pay by debit card. Okay, so you want it home delivered? Yeah, I'm not going to sail it myself from the Netherlands to Seoul. So I want some sort of delivery plan. Okay, so now suddenly also a logistical partner is involved in the transaction process. Okay, so it becomes more complex. We have a buyer, a seller, a ship, a product, and we have a logistical partner. Okay, so we need to calculate transport cost. Of course, we can do that now real time. But we also need to pay our taxes over the ship. So suddenly also the IRS is involved in our transaction. And we need to pay import fees, of course. So we also have customs involved in the transaction. And we're, of course, not going to pay everything now in cash. Of course, we're going to pay maybe a small amount now, but a major amount when we get the ship here in our harbor. So we need also a form of authentication to do that. So we have all kinds of parties involved in this transaction. And all these people need to talk together. And my question to you, and something to think about, is, okay, now what kind of common language would we need to make this possible and, in fact, get you all your ship? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a challenge for you, Floris. Because we have had the introduction of Paul Iske, talking about combinatoric innovation, aligning with multiple parties in creating the next generation bank, the next generation service, financial service, can also be an insurance company or whatever. I have a question for you, Floris. Can you combine the story of Paul, combinatoric innovation, with the story we've just heard about how can standardization support economic growth? Maybe we have the answer with you. I don't know. Please, let's go.
Thank you, Floris. At least we're making an attempt. And it seems that we started doing well. UETP, new language for doing business. Will it happen or not? About 14 months ago, I was the group head of strategy of ABN AMRO Bank. And not a one-pager, as what was suggested this morning, but a two-pager document we basically posted on an innovation forum. And we said, is it possible to create a common language, a uniform economic transaction protocol? Two-page idea. Within 1 month, I spent 15% of my time doing UETP. Within 2 months, it was 40% of my time. And within 3 months, basically, we set up a new foundation, Fogafet, an independent non-profit foundation, to establish this new language, UETP. And that's how things started to evolve quite fast. What's the pain we're facing? What are we trying to solve? Why don't we have the bold execution that we actually seek to establish? Bold execution. When I was fully involved with ABN AMRO's activities, we had an organization with 10,000 interfaces. An interface is basically translating the same information from one format into another. It's a connectivity, it's a communication problem. So you can imagine, we have a big bowl of noodles, 10,000, and they're all connected with each other. Do you dare to pick one out and to change something? Probably not, because you don't know what will start to move. And this is exactly the situation we're in. How bold can you execute when you have 10,000 interfaces? That's quite a bit of a problem. If we are analyzing these interfaces, basically they talk about transactions. And the transactions, what they say, it is basically something about who, what, how much, when, where, and how. How difficult can it be to make that in a standardized way? Now, if we take a look at economic evolution, here we become a bit more philosophical. You see the different stages of the hunter-gatherer, the farmer, then we become into the industrial age, and finally the information age. What we see is that economic evolution intends to accelerate. Our economic space is evolving from local to nation state to global, increasingly fast. And increasingly our interdependence becomes bigger. Perhaps that's the real storyline of economic evolution. And we become interdependent. We do labor specialization. We become ever more specialized. And we have to communicate more with each other. Now, let's think. The moment we create maximum economic output, it can only happen when all our talents and all our characteristics are combined in such a way, they're connected in such a way that we can make maximum value. We need aligned connectivity. That's what we try to achieve. But if we see what is actually happening with the internet, We see more and more data formats. We see more people asking information. We know the information is there. But we ask that in our own template, our own format. Currently I'm writing a book about UETP. And while doing so, I have a son of 3 and 5, and they started to argue. They had an argument about a small toy car. And I suggested, guys, can you please play with each other in a friendly way? Try to do that. They both came up to me and said, well, Daddy, I really tried to explain to my brother that I really wanted to have this car. So what they do, they take their own perspective. They're not yet mature enough to see one's another's perspective. And that's the same is happening with the internet. We take our own perspective. This is the information I want. This is the format I want to use. Their older sister of 7 years old, she understands that if you want to solve the problem, you have to consider the other's perspective. And that is what we need to do with the internet as well. If we want to transact globally, we have to start understanding each other's perspectives. Otherwise, we cannot communicate with each other. Because the economy is growing faster and faster with ever more communication. I just want to do a test. Take out of your pocket the latest transaction receipt you have. Just take a look. Something you're not ashamed of. I have something of my dry cleaner. And I just want to do a check. Just raise your hand, you don't have to respond to anything, if the information is not on your receipt. Do you have an amount? Information on how much? Anybody who doesn't have an amount, please raise your hand. We all have the amount. Do we have information about what a product? Is there a kind of product description? Is there information about time? When did it happen? Is there information about where did it happen? Perhaps some information about who is involved. And what will be a bit more difficult, the information on how did it happen? What was the contractual type? So basically, we have a billion ways to say the same thing. Now you can imagine how important it is that you can come together to solve this. So UETP, that will be a new vision on doing transactions. Suppose we have a smart transaction receipt. Right now the transaction receipts that we have, they just display information. Just display. There's no intelligence to it. But the moment the transaction receipt can actually be interpreted, we can start making services around it. Can you imagine that your transaction receipt becomes smart? It can pay for itself. It can file its own taxes. It can do its own accounting. It can deliver the goods, product, services straight away from the seller to the buyer. Because all that information is in there already. We just don't use it. If we take a look at the smart transaction receipt, you can build all kinds of functionalities around it. So what you currently see, when people, especially in the financial world, when they think about a transaction, they think about a payment. But a lot more things are happening. We are identifying each other in a transaction. Are you really the person you say you are? We also want to make sure that we can share certain information, but not everything. We want to have registered goods. We want to be able to do a logistical process. We want to do fiscal elements. Authorization, quite important. The moment we have a transaction receipt and we do an export between the Netherlands and Korea, we're exporting something to the Netherlands. Right now, there's a customs process, you have to do the clearing. But if the transaction receipt says, exporting country, Korea, importing country, the Netherlands, then automatically, with the contract type, the goods, you know exactly who are the authorities who need to be involved to approve something, yes or no. what is also interesting right now, if we process a transaction, we basically see that we do that in different domains. We have a payment domain, we have a logistical domain, and every time we use the same information to go from one transaction service to another transaction service. What we intend to do with UETP, we create an economic group chat. Let's have everybody in one conversation. Means we all share the same information, have the same information, don't have to translate it again, and that is going to make life a lot easier. What is important, we're not talking about applications anymore, we're talking about an ecosystem. So UETP is an ecosystem language. Right now the internet is in its immature stage, where everything is written in HTTP. So when you go to your browser and in Google, you search for UETP, you get a different transaction or instruction than if it is with Yahoo. With UETP, we want to have one instruction, only the addressee will be different. So how do we create such a standard? Because a lot of people, when you start discussing it, are trying to boil the ocean. Well, here, and this is inspiration I got in Korea as well, during my visit in October. Languages can only be successful, and the great King Sejong, he understood this, if they have meaning, purpose, and are easy to use. That's exactly what we try to do at UETP. If we take at language, at semantics, basically in almost any language, the 5 most important verbs to be, describing people, organizations, to have, possessions, assets, wallets, money. What I want, the demand side of the market. What I can, the supply side of the market. And doing it, the market itself. If we can basically bring the semantics back, asking the most important questions in transactions, we actually can get very, very far. But what we're also doing, and perhaps this is the real difference, we're not first making a standard and then together see, shall we implement it, and then it starts working. No, that's not the way you can start with such an initiative. That will be way too big. We start on a voluntary basis. So if there's like 2 organizations that want to communicate, they want to have the concepts, the functionalities of their communication being registered. What we're doing, we're building a knowledge model. And the knowledge model captures all this information. It says we need to have a buyer, we need to have a seller. The buyer should be able to do a payment. And basically what we do, we capture all this knowledge, and every time somebody else comes in this conversation, new concepts and new functionalities start to be added. So this knowledge model, this information model, is growing. And with it, the data model and the messages. So we don't have to start with a language that is fully complete. We start with a language that is building itself while we go, creating an ever bigger community of users. And what we also do, the moment the message is made or is clear, we can come with some kind of transaction certification. We say this transaction really behaved according to the language. So we can have certainty that this can work.
Floris, can I in the meantime ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because this looks a little bit like creating the Esperanto to talk the same language cross-region. Can you respond on that?
It's not only cross-region, it is cross-industry, but I think one of the challenges that we have when doing business out of Europe with Asia, it's also a language issue. And that is something, do you mean that, Hans? That is also something we can start to avoid. The moment there is a kind of request for growth, a request for information out of Europe, that can be translated straight away in Korean.
And that's one. And what I also mean is Esperanto was never a success. because everybody had to learn a new language.
Correct. Now I understand that part of the question. Basically, it is not that you have to implement UATP straight away. You only have to be able to connect to UATP to work with the UATP network. So one of the things is that when people want to start working with UATP, please don't change your back office overnight. And that will take time as well. But as long as you can understand UATP, then with an interface, you can basically engage with a very fast-growing global community. UATP, like internet, HTTP, it has different reasons, different motivation for different users. So what's the business case? The business case is always specific. Now, how does it work? We were talking about this economic group chat. So we have these different services around the transaction. They come together, the service providers. Whether it's fiscal authorities, logistics companies, banks, they come together. They provide services around the transaction. This is the old way we did it. We have information over there, information on the buyer, the seller, the good, the product, the amount. And we pass that information every time in a different format into a different service. Very cumbersome process. And all split processes. First, you do the identification. Then you do some security. Then you ask the logistics partner. Then you know the price. Then you can inform your bank. It's quite cumbersome. The moment we can have our intentions of the transactions, we can send that into the group chat. And all the service providers can look at it. Can I accept and process this request? And under what conditions? We create a different communication. It basically means if everybody agrees, it has to agree, the transaction can be processed. If one or two parties don't agree, at least we don't start engaging into a transaction that will never finish. So what we see right now, sometimes you try to do a transaction and afterwards you realize, this and this can't be managed. Right now we can have that certainty straight away. Another thing that we're doing to make this possible, we create IDs, agnostic IDs. You can say this is a big machine stamping out a lot of stickers. A sticker with a unique identifier. And that identifier can be used whatever way you want it. You can put it on people, on messages, on assets. And in this way, we can make a virtual world out of an existing real world. At the moment I put a sticker on myself on this desk, the owner of the desk, perhaps I can buy it. And that gives a kind of flexibility that we currently don't have. This is really a fascinating way to think how transactions can evolve. We can name something, we can reference something, and we can just start doing transactions.
Floris, can you give an example how that might work? This ID.
This ID, well, for instance, right now within Europe, we're discussing with the European Commission, and we have like 28 countries with all different identities, electronic identities, and they're not interoperable. So one of the things we're trying to do, and we will speak with them later in May, to connect all the existing national identity schemes through something like the identity generator of UATP. It is a concept that is free to use. The identity is really, really very small cost, something like 0.001 something. So that's not the issue, but it is a way, because we can place the stickers on existing schemes, we can actually have, over the internet, people within Europe communicate with each other and actually sign legal documentation, because it's very strong encryption, very strong security, and it is legally valid within at least the European context. Now, something like that could happen in Korea as well. If we can identify Korean nationals, Korean organizations, Korean assets, houses, boats, machines, whatever, we just give it a sticker. And then suddenly it can become part of an ecosystem in which we can do transactions.
So I can sign contracts at a distance?
You can sign contracts at a distance. So how are we building this UETP? Because it's not a standard that is, boom, first ready. We start with small pilots, organizations that say, hey, we want to bring this together, this kind of communication. And I'll just show one of them, two of them. The first, I don't know if you can see this, a regular checkout of a web shop. One of the problems that we see when we do transactions over the internet is that both the seller wants to have certainty of payment, wants to be paid. The client wants to have delivery. Payment and delivery are currently not at the same moment. So either one of the two parties is taking the risk. That's in a regular payments process. The moment we can link the payment process with the logistical flow, and we can say, the buyer, we can reserve a certain amount from its bank account. The merchant knows, the buyer can pay. And what we do here, the buyer types in a PIN code. The PIN code is SMS to its mobile. The moment the logistics company is coming, the buyer has to enter the PIN code again so he can accept the goods. The moment he accepts the goods by entering the PIN code, payment is released. It's a letter of credit, retail size, just as an almost free service, making the transaction a lot more transparent. Another thing, and this is probably even going to have a bigger impact, is that something we see emerging right now in Europe, where banks want to implement the following. Right now, we have a transaction system where you have a buyer, the bank of the buyer, we have the seller, the bank of the seller. And typically, communication goes from the buyer to the buyer's bank, from the buyer's bank to the seller's bank, from the seller's bank to the seller. So the client cannot speak straight away with the bank of the seller. Because in UETP we organize a group chat, that can be done. Now, typically, if you're a bank and the merchant, the seller, is coming to you and they say, I have sent out so many invoices to my clients and I want to be financed. Yeah, sorry, you can send out invoices. We're going to finance you by providing you a loan over your balance sheet. It's quite expensive. Capital requirements, it's quite an expensive solution. The moment the buyer is coming into the equation in the group chat, there will be an invoice. But now the interesting thing is, if the buyer says, I'm going to pay this invoice, and the bank of the seller knows that the buyer is willing to pay for its invoice and even provide that collateral to the seller's bank, then the seller's bank can say, hey, I have collateral. Anyway, the buyer wants to buy, so there's nothing to lose for the buyer. The buyer is likely going to get a lower price. So we already see that treasury operations, treasury funding, working capital finance is drastically going to change just by a simple way of communicating in a different way.
We will come back to this example when we have the presentation of Justus Brouwers. We will elaborate a little bit more on the supply chain finance case. Floris, can I ask you 5 minutes?
Oh yeah, almost done. So what are we doing? We have, around 2015, we have the first version of UETP has been published by the end of Q1. And within September we expect to have a full first version ready, where basic functionality is already supported. The first commercial applications are coming live, very promising, and parties that are working with UETP right now, they only are in a kind of mode, we want to do more. So it is accelerating quite fast. So who's already involved? We organized this as a foundation. The foundation has a no-profit goal, really for purpose. If we want to create a UETP, it has to be free. It has to be open, just like HTTP, that everyone can use it. So there's no earnings model for the foundation. That's really important. Open source, and the foundation itself doesn't want to have a big role in it. It wants to minimize itself. It should be a useful language and not useful for a foundation in particular. The parties that are joining are global leading technology firms, payment and financial industry. Definitely, I think also it has to do because we started a bit in Europe, that Europe is a bit advanced right now, but we see it coming in Latin America, Middle East, and also right now we hope in the Far East. A lot of interest from central banks, monetary authorities, banker association groups, logistics sector. We see seaports, airports joining the conversation to build a logistical protocol. The global, more famous consultancy firms are there. Health, insurance companies, telcos, government in the Netherlands. Quite interesting to see that most of the ministries are now working together. So the Ministry of Economic Affairs, the Ministry of Infrastructure, Defense, Coastal Guards, Marine. So we see just within almost a year, a little bit more than a year after the two-page idea, that this has gotten a huge traction. What we intend to do, we want to establish in the different regions, because this has to be a global dialogue. If we want to make a global standard of talking with each other over the internet, understanding each other's perspectives, it is important that this is not happening out of the Netherlands or out of Europe, where we perhaps got a bit of first traction. As soon as possible, we want to move into the different regions.
Floris, can you stay with that picture for a moment? I would like to ask the audience, what do they think about the possible implementation of UTP in specifically Korea, South Korea, but Northeast Asia as a whole? Who can respond on that question?
Perhaps, Hans, it needs
Maybe you can answer the question.
a bit of time to reflect, because this is a completely different way of.
Can you answer the question
of
first? What will it mean for Northeast Asia, Korea specifically?
One of the
to
things,
implement
it will be lower transaction cost for certain. Better connectivity, not only within Korea, but definitely outside. The export potential of Korea is huge, but the problem is that Korean products are not always known to the world. And I think that will be very, very relevant. It will be easier that your product catalog can be immediately displayed, that you can start bidding on overseas deals, but also especially to help the SMEs, smaller companies that have huge connectivity costs, administrative cost in order to make these kind of transactions. It will lower transaction and access to the economy quite a bit, lower transaction cost. But what is also important, it will be more secure. Identification, authentication, security, it will really boost from where we are now with the internet. We all know the problems with credit cards, the sensitivity of credit card information that can be stolen. Credit card information within UTP does no longer have to be with the merchant. It can only stay with the client in the financial processor. These kind of things can be quite a lot of examples, but this would be one of them. Now, what we do, we want to really bring this together. And one of the purposes of this visit, obviously, is to get to know what is happening, what is relevant, explain a bit about UATP, try to see if we can make the connection. But most of all, we seek leadership. We seek similar kind of leadership that currently is taking place in ministries, in universities in Europe. We would like to see that kind of leadership connect with that in Korea and Northeast Asia. So the invitation is there. Let's see if we can really bring this and pull this off together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Floris. I think it can be qualified as a radical innovation. New for the sectors, totally new for organizations, and we need your help. Because co-creation is all about doing it together in dialogue. We have a piece of the truth, you have a piece of the truth, the other regions have a piece of the truth, and together we can make it. So that's the invitation for today. But how can we make it work? Because semantics is one, speaking the same economic language amongst all actors, cross-region. But we also have to have IT functionality. Still, we have to use the IT functionality to make it work. And therefore, we work closely with founding partners, just like HP, who gave global commitment to the UTP. And Justus, can I invite you to elaborate a little bit on that aspect?
Absolutely, thank you. And to get back to your question that you asked, Floris, what is the benefit of embracing UTP? I think I've tried to capture that specifically on the front page of the presentation. It leads to accelerated growth and higher profitability. So, and I'll elaborate a bit further on that throughout my presentation, using use cases rather than only the discussion and the dialogue on protocols, the benefits of protocol standards, and furthermore the whole UTP mechanism.
Yeah, and it's good to inform the audience that the PowerPoint presentations will be available through the website of K.E.Y.
So unfortunately I need to quickly go through some theory because I think rightly as Floris and Job have already indicated, it can be perceived as a quite academic standard development. So when I started to be engaged out of HP, meeting with Floris and the focus that people on UTP, I needed to present this internally, and I could not always use the huge amount of data and information that these nice gentlemen had prepared. So I twisted it a bit around and gave my opinion on what it does and what it means and why it is beneficial. Third topic I'd like to, or the second, there's a number of examples, concrete examples based on scientific evidence and research, which I think are highly influential on the future path of UTP, and also will instruct why I think it's beneficial to embrace it. And then next thing is what capabilities are actually required to develop use cases and to reap the benefits of the implementation of the protocol. And I end with a short case study and an invitation to participate. So what is it? I think Flo has already described all the domains that UTP would like to transact in, and I've tried to capture it a bit differently. I think it enhances the transaction efficiency and effectiveness. And how does it do that? Per Job, as Job said, it is embracing standards that enable straight-through processing, automation, and reuse of data coming from other domains which are typically not being used, and is securely connecting that across separate IT domains. But it is fully controlled by the end user, what he wants to share and what not, and it allows for a feedback and most importantly feed-forward type of modeling. So if you want to conduct a transaction and you can already project that you need to have, for a certain business reason, a 100% guarantee, the transaction path will be different. If you are happy that 80% of the transactions would need to go right, you can choose a different path. So that is the whole concept. So what does it do? Why is it important? And I'll get back to it a bit later. It facilitates the development of trust. And trust is quite important, and all the more for transaction cost, because through increasing specialization and the increasing length of a global supply chain and globalization in general, transaction costs tend to increase. So what are transaction costs? Transaction costs are all the costs associated not with the raw materials in producing something, so not the manufacturing of a process. It's not the capital and the interest rates that you tend to calculate and put upon the capital, but it's all the other associated processes like communications, like satisficing, choosing what combinations of elements eventually become a new product and go to market. So this is quite important because for traditional manufacturing and specifically automotive, I have a case study including Korea. This already constitutes between 35 and 40% of the overall cost of a production chain. For the service industry, which to some extent can be even more traditionally organized, it can go up between 55 and 95%. So if you think about the amount of benefits that you can achieve by not optimizing your production, but rather focusing on your transaction cost, there's a lot of elements to be gained, or you can improve a lot.
Justus?
Yeah.
You make a statement of serious percentage of savings.
Absolutely.
And you easily go on, and I think the audience would be interested to hear a little more about that.
Okay, so bear with me for one more slide, and the next two are actually on the amount of savings. It details a bit where they are coming from and what the correlation is.
Thank you.
So I just want to get this concept of transaction cost and what it constitutes right. So these 6 boxes all have the major elements that consist of transaction cost. So you have the ex-ante contracting, which is basically the whole searching that you're doing if you want to buy something new, and that leads to then eventually a contract with a certain amount of defined risk. That's where your value of contingencies comes into play. And post-contract, you need to have enforcement in place and monitoring to allow that the contract is actually being fulfilled appropriately. Other costs associated are the cost of information sharing. So Floor has also already said this can be quite tedious, and last but not least, interfacing. That's where banks, specifically legacy-oriented banks, which have huge investments made throughout the past decades in IT, they can have 10,000 interfaces, and each interface is again a translation, is again a duplication to some extent, and leads to additional transaction costs. And then you have obviously overhead and working capital associated with all of this. So what this research that I will go into has dug up is that trust in itself and confidence in the counterpart is the key mechanism for lowering all of these elements. And the interesting case is, I'm not sure if you're aware, but HP is hosting the largest database for the automotive industry, in which all car suppliers list their products, and this can be accessed by all the major automotive companies to make sure that they comply to the regulations, that they need to be able to retrace the path of each individual element being manufactured into a car. And because of this position, we have a good perspective on the whole automotive industry, because we know what happens throughout the life cycle of with what elements are being sold to whom, and who is using what. So we did some research in the period of 1985 to 1995, and it consisted out of a sample of over 300 automotive suppliers, and it was also conducted here, I think, for more than 50 suppliers conducted out of Korea, and it delivered that On the left-hand side, you have low trustworthiness, and on the right-hand side, you have high trustworthiness. And the difference was leading up to 8% in profitability. And the reason for that, the sole indication was more trust leads to lower transaction cost ex ante, so you don't need to look for the appropriate product as hard, nor does the contracting take as much as effort and money. After the contract, you don't need to worry too much about the effect of failure, because you know you have a partnership, you trust each other, you will work your way in a fair and equitable way. And I think the absolute killer is it's all about the information sharing, and there's a correlation between trust and information sharing, but it's unclear what the causality is. So it's unclear if you start trusting people more if you share more information, or if it's the other way around, you start sharing more information if you trust. However, both are required to make this a success. And I think what the benefit of UTP is, it has systemic trust. Because you know all the parties that are there, you know the transactions, you can plot the transaction path, and therefore you can choose the risk that you would like to run making a transaction. In the service industry, and this one is specifically related to knowledge service, which is a pretty traditional industry, the amount of opportunity to save is even bigger. Services industry is really hampered by a lack of information sharing. So if you look at it, in step one, often hours which need to be written are not being reported because there is a lack of trust of the employees who need to report that these reports will not be used for different goals which they are fearful of. Then the second step, or often also forgotten, because sometimes you don't know at the end of the week or at the end of the month where you did spend your time on. And the next one is often problems or effort is being delivered, but it did not help solving the problem. So again, a lot of leakage. And then last but not least, quite traditionally, at least in Europe, the discount on any bill that you can send out is on average, or at least 10%, but on average higher, because effort is being listed too late, is not in the bill, is being disputed, and the discount to get your cash is more than 10%. So again, UETP, if implemented in such an industry, could lead to a significant amount of savings and efficiency gains. So last but not least, again, one more, I would say, back to the theory. There were a couple of guys, one is K.E.Y, and he invented the theory of the firm. He said basically, look, if markets are the most efficient and effective way for establishing price and distributing services and goods, why are there firms? And the answer that he found out was, in some cases, transaction costs are just too large to be borne by markets. And the statement that I think we can make based on what UTP will do to trust and what trust does to transaction cost is that if you implement UETP, the percentage of market will increase. What does it mean for Korea? It means more growth. Markets grow faster than individual companies. So what does K.E.Y have to do? K.E.Y describes that if you have a platform or if you have a system, the system will be as complex as all individual communication and stakeholders. So if you want to have a truly efficient and effective system, you need to make sure that you combine it to such an extent that there is almost no duplication. So we've taken this key criteria and this key theoretic elements to define how we feel the platform should look like, and that is what we are underway building. It's the systemic trust which reduces the perception of uncertainty, which has the beneficial impact that we're looking for. It's a single industry platform to avoid any duplications in terms of interfaces. It's a platform as a service, so you only pay for what you use. So no capital investments upfront, and then let's see if we can earn our money back as a user of this platform. No, we believe in this concept, and we are going to host this as a platform, paid as a service. So, to Job's point, it has standardized interfaces and contracts. It is obviously straight-through processing capabilities, and it has verifiable actors and transaction integrity.
Justus, can I ask a question? This seems to be a little bit something of the bigger players. Big banks, big financial industry, big firms like you that gonna do this. This morning we've learned that we can learn a lot about startups, lean startups, inside the company, or startups just like new setup SMEs. How does that relate?
You're absolutely right. So, and let me, I hope I can, yeah. There's one use case which we have already implemented, and it's a use case called access to talent. We implemented this for ABN AMRO Bank, and what we did was we asked a French partner of us called Streammind, who's a 10 people strong startup almost, but who has some interesting software which has received regulatory approval from the French financial regulator with regard to CEPA compliancy of their transactions. And we invited them and brought them to the table for UTP, and we build a platform that allows for a secure loop between the bank, between trainers, and between the tax office. And by doing this, we could, and we've done this actually in I think we started discussions in October. It went live in, was it February, end of February. So very short period of time. And we could do this because we already have the major building blocks up and running, because we have cloud, which is highly secure, meeting all regulatory requirements, and we just plugged them this French partner, which met the same criteria, and brought that to ABN.
Still want to go one step deeper on that right out.
Okay.
It still feels like a little bit, I have the elephant called HP. And think of the Korean situation, I have the elephant called Samsung. And I have this lean and mean startup having very valuable software that can lift UTP.
Yeah.
What about the elephant and the mouse? And the mouse. Will the elephant step on the mouse in the end or not?
I don't know. I mean, I think the reason why it's a success is because we aligned not only with you on a successful business outcome, but we also aligned with this small company on a successful business outcome. So it was also a bit different. Normally we would contract and procure on cost, but now we have shared the risk and are also sharing the rewards, and not only towards ABN, but also with our partner. So our initial investments were therefore also relatively low, which helped obviously in getting the approvals inside HP for such an endeavor. So now back, let's see if I can do that. The supply chain finance use case. So if you start thinking about that capital is actually specifically in Europe if you're a large company, you get the capital for free. Actually, people are willing to pay you to lend you their capital. So there's a strong focus of regulators that are keen to simplify and standardize products that you can bring to market as a financial service institute. There's an upcoming new legislation and regulation called PSD2, and what it does, it basically opens up the information inside banks that they need to share with everybody that the consumer or merchant this data is coming from asks for. So what are the consequences? Having capital and having leveraged capital is no longer a differentiator. So there's a strong commoditization, and therefore you can't compete anymore on your products. Furthermore, if you look at your production cost, so your capital and your interest, it's the same for everybody almost if you are a decent bank. So the only thing that you can compete on is actually transaction cost and user satisfaction. And risk profiling data due to PSD2 will become widely available, and banks will lose the mandate or the monopoly that they used to have on the risk profiling. So our belief is that banks will be cut loose to a large extent from their customer base, and I think they will only be provisioning the capital and do the user intake. So from that perspective, we are thinking about, and actually the day before yesterday, or yesterday actually, I presented this to HP internal management, and they've just given the go-ahead for this. We're going to build a platform that does supply chain finance for small and medium enterprises. So the typical loan would be below 250K, which is a completely underserved market right now in the Netherlands, because the cost of creating this risk profile is way too high. But because of UTP, where you have all the data sources that are using it straightforward or straight-through processing, you can create a straight-through processing capability that is able to provide the appropriate risk profile and risk module, and then provide that in a pooling module back to a capital provider like a bank. And the only thing that we are actually needing a bank for right now is to help us establish the sales channel for this. So it will be almost a back office free bank, because the full back office, including the transaction and the payments, will be done by this platform. So it starts at the green with point of sales at merchants, in which they conduct all the transactions with their other merchants or with their consumers. And on this basis, we can automate the whole risk profiling, because we can see the track record, we can evaluate what the risk is, we know what their assets are, and then it runs through the payment platform. There's the same, I would say, regulatory approved middleware that we're using for access to talent, the case I just described, we're using here as well. And then the risk module and the pooling module are coming on top of that, which allows us to offer it in securitized packages to capital providers. So this is meeting all regulatory requirements, and I don't know the planning yet, it's being calculated, but we hope to be able to offer this platform somewhere this year as a service. And that, I think, is bringing me to the end of the presentation. There's a few more slides on this supply supply chain finance in the appendix. It's too deep level to go through it. It's going to be sent to you anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Please have a seat because I have some questions for the three of you. Because we have talked about a radical innovation, standardization being the leveraging the economic growth, as Job had described. UETP, the economic internet, also made possible by IT partners, big and small. I want to explicitly say that big players and small players need to combine their efforts and leveraging their capabilities into new innovations. We have worked some months on this UETP, gentlemen. The question is for you, what surprised you the most? And I would like to start with Floris.
What surprised me most? Well, first, we started with a 2-page document, and 14 months ago, and we could never have imagined that so fast, so many organizations in so many countries are actually willing to work with us. What we see is an adoption rate. The moment we meet CIOs, CTOs of organizations, they typically say 60 to 80% they want to join. And that is huge. That is really what surprised me.
Thank you. Job.
2 words. Ease and speed. What surprised me was the speed at which partners could develop a new application. And we've just seen two of them, but the amounts of solutions that you can build on such a platform is huge. But the speed at which these partners do that and implement that, that's extraordinary. And it has also something to do with the ease and it's well, I'm a half technical guy, and I even understand it. So in that sense, that's really interesting because it makes it easy to implement it in your organization via a sort of super API in a way, and to really do cool stuff with it.
Yeah, Hans, I think what amazes me most is the fact that you can use the savings that you can make in the transaction costs to recombine and create new value chains quite easily because of the speed and the security and the partnership and the openness of the whole system. And that is, for HP, is the prime reason to want to lead in this development rather than follow.
Paul has elaborated in his first story also about following your dreams a little bit, do the unusual. And Floris, as the first thinker of this UTP, I want to ask you, what would be your dream sitting here in Korea, Seoul, South Korea, in Seoul? What would be your dream if you leave the room? And what will happen afterwards?
Well, I will leave the room to have an interview straight away. So, but at least in the 2 days that we are present here during the K.E.Y platform event, we really hope to get into traction, into contact with people in Northeast Asia and Korea that want to take this further. So that this open platform, it's not even a platform, I would even call it an open society, where people participate, that it strengthens and that we can have mutual benefits from this region and other regions in the world. There's so much knowledge, concepts, functionalities that can be brought to the world, that can be disclosed. And it would be great if we can interact and engage with that more. So we're looking for leadership. So let's say, hey, great, I would like to know within my organization if we can use this, so that we can follow up with that. And I don't also mind taking a bit of a leadership role here, seeing if I can gather with others and make it established. We clearly provide some facilities in the sense that we want to establish a regional foundation. drive of people that say, yes, we believe in this, we want to bring this further, and have an autonomous, independent team with which we can connect. That would be really great.
It always seems impossible until it's done. That's a phrase of Nelson Mandela. I want to conclude this session. Floris has 5 minutes left before he has to leave for an interview. If you want to ask him some questions, he will be here for 5 minutes with us, and will be at the conference today and tomorrow, as well as the other gentleman and myself. So if you have questions or whatever you want to talk or engage or whatever, please come. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.